So one of the most common things that we do as traders, especially options traders, is we like to backtest certain strategies on certain underlying products. And I get questions about backtesting on occasion. I don't do a lot of backtesting these days. I kind of know what strategies tend to work on which kinds of products and in general. But here's the thing. You can't really rely too heavily on backtesting as far as the backtesting. It's always flawed. Backtests are never exact because you can't trade exactly like the backtest, because the backtest, there's some things it just doesn't take into account. For example, when you backtest, it doesn't take into account slippage. It doesn't take into account liquidity problems. Like if you backtest something that's kind of mediocre as far as liquidity, a lot of times it's just going to assume that you got filled at the mid price or whatever, every single time, when in reality, when you're trading things that are not quite liquid, you're getting screwed most of the time on a lot of your pricing, both in and out of the trade. And the backtest can't really take that into consideration. It also doesn't take into consideration like transaction costs, fees, things like that. Another big flaw with backtesting is overfitting. Now, what is overfitting? Well, typically this is done when people pick a very specific historical time frame for the backtest. A period of a certain, I say 18 months or 3 years, whatever it happens to be, whatever the time frame, but it had to be that specific time period, start to finish, for that backtest to have that desired result for you. Because if you'd have picked any other time frame outside of that, the test wouldn't look quite as good. So you have to be careful when you're backtesting. Try that backtest in a variety of different time frames over different time periods. Don't just, hey, this strategy works great in 2023 and 2024 when the market was just going up every single day. Well, if it's a bullish strategy, yeah, I bet it worked all the time in those years. How did it work in 2022 when the market was going down every day, right? You have to backtest a strategy in different periods of time, different market conditions. Otherwise, you can't really trust it. One of the biggest limiting factors to backtesting is always going to be data, historical data. There is not a lot of great historical data on many of the underlyings that you probably want to backtest. Now, things like SPY, right? Plenty of data, historical data. You can backtest SPY all you want, right? But we've got a lot of data on that. But, other, more niche products that people trade a lot less, the data may not be there for you to get a really accurate and reliable backtest on. Now, personally, one of my biggest criticisms with backtesting is the fact that a backtest can never take into account psychological factors, your emotions, what you're thinking at the time, because some of that stuff will affect how you actually trade. You're not going to trade like the machine. You're not going to trade like a computer and do everything strictly by the parameters you set. Even if that's what you go into it thinking you're going to do, trust me, in practice, that's not what you're going to do. For example, I can run a back test right now on selling 10 delta puts, 90 DTE in the ES futures. And I know that back test, going back, say, 5 years or so, that back test is going to tell me I'm going to win like nearly 100% of the time, like 98, 99% of the time, if I put it on at 90 DTE, take it off at 21 DTE, and manage at 50% max profit. I'm going to maybe lose 2 or 3 trades over the course of 5 years, right? That's what the back test says. Now, in reality, I would have to go through many events in the last 5 years that there's no way I could have held those positions. For example, well, just recently, February and March of this year, the market downturn because of all the tariff talk, there were some ES or MES positions I held, some futures options positions that I had to get out of. I couldn't hold, right? Because of buying power exploding on me, it was more risk than I wanted to take. Now, I'm not a computer. The computer says, hey, just hold it. 99% of the time, you'll be fine. I probably would have been fine on all those positions. But at the time, I can't take that chance, right? So August 5th of last year, when, we had that crazy volatility spike, and buying power exploded, especially on any futures options positions you held at the time. I had some futures options positions with the buying power went absolutely through the roof. And it was like very close to triggering a margin call in my account. I had to close some positions that otherwise I wouldn't have had to close. So the back test will never take into account, some of those positions that you just couldn't hold. It also doesn't take into account sometimes you will take positions off early, not because they're losers, but because they're winners, maybe because they're really quick winners. Like I don't hold, if I have a position on that I'm supposed to hold to 50% max profit, but let's say I put on a 90 DTE trade and in one day I make 30% max profit in the very first day, I'm closing that trade. I'm not holding on to that trade, another 89 days or whatever, in the hopes to make a few more percentage points. No, I'm going to take that off right away. And again, the back test is never going to account for that. Again, the back test is a machine. It's a computer. You're not a machine. You're not a computer. Even if you automate a lot of your trading with bots or whatever it happens to be, still you are in control of the bot and of your account. When you see, for example, buying power really creeping up on you and think, sometimes you are going to make decisions that go against the original plan. And that's what you're supposed to do, right? Because if you trade like a machine, you could end up in a situation where you end up, for example, blowing up your account. So again, the backtesting is great. It gives you a general idea of how certain strategies on certain underlyings work, but don't be surprised when in real life, things work a little different than you might expect. Anyway, food for thought. Peace, guys.